Final Fantasy is a legendary JRPG franchise with so much history, so many games behind it, and so many fans. A franchise that set new standards and created some of the most influential video games in both the late 90s and early 2000s. Fast forward to 2025, and while Final Fantasy is still very loved by many, it is nowhere near the same status it once had. In fact, it's left lots of traditional fans in the dust as a result of modern Final Fantasy changing their formula at the flip of a switch with every entry they've released. And it's made me think that Final Fantasy 17 should just be the best Final Fantasy video game they can make it, and not strive to be something that is, completely new, something that is unfamiliar to what fans already know. I've always stressed that I really enjoy modern Final Fantasy, from the Final Fantasy VII Remake games to the ongoing Final Fantasy XIV and its expansions, Final Fantasy 15 to a certain extent, and if you've been following the channel, I am personally a big fan of Final Fantasy 16 as well. Remake is a game that finds that balance between traditional Final Fantasy and real-time gameplay. And while Final Fantasy 15 and 16 do still feel like Final Fantasy games in many ways, its common themes, its art style, mixing fantasy with sci-fi elements. These games and the devs behind them are clearly fans of the series, but their mindset is flawed in thinking that fans want something new every time, rather than keeping gameplay more familiar and more consistent. With every new game since Final Fantasy X, it's felt like they've been trying to chase other trends rather than setting their own. And while there have been many great entries in the series since Final Fantasy X, they never felt like they were pushing the series forward in popularity in a way that the older games achieved. And to be clear, I am not saying that turn-based was the reason for Final Fantasy's success, the reason why it rose to that success in the first place. It was consistency. Consistency in an incredibly deep and interesting narrative, a heartfelt story. It's consistency in gameplay, and really just sticking to a consistent formula. The franchise stuck with a formula, continuously innovated on that formula, and made it theirs. The problem with the franchise now is that they aren't picking that one formula. While I do appreciate Square Enix for trying to experiment and do new things with the franchise, they've also created a situation to where the fans are so divided every game, because the gameplay is so unfamiliar to what Final Fantasy is most known for. Strategic combat, a party system, and a deep progression system. Listen, you all know that I absolutely love Final Fantasy 16, and the gameplay is most definitely not one of its problems. In fact, it's easily one of the best parts of the game. That experimentation it provides, the player expression that it gives to the player. It's that type of freedom in 16's combat that keeps me coming back well after its launch. But it's clear that leaning solely towards just being a character action game when it comes to its combat didn't vibe with the fan base. It's not what the majority of fans expect when it comes to the gameplay of Final Fantasy. In many ways, Final Fantasy 16 is a return to form. It feels like the classic pixel era in many ways, and even Clive Rossfield, the main protagonist, feels like a modernized version of those classic heroes, even mirroring Cecile from Final Fantasy IV in his many character arcs, as if the team wanted you to draw those comparisons, because clearly this is a team who loves the pixel era of the series. It's clear that this team behind Final Fantasy XIV and 16, Creative Studio 3, love the series. But this goes for Square Enix in general when I say that they very much underestimate their own franchise and how much people love what they've already had for years. We don't need so much new. We don't need to keep resetting the slate every entry, because look at the state of the franchise, look at the fan base. A franchise that doesn't have a consistent gameplay identity. A fan base that feels so divided, who at this point doesn't even feel like they know what they want, because there's so many different games, so many different combat systems, so many shifts in direction that the series has taken over the years. And that is alienating, because now you have such a divided fan base. base. You have all these different factions of fans explaining what they think a real Final Fantasy is in its gameplay, instead of before where, fans still had their own favorite Final Fantasy that they would defend to the ends of the earth, but at the end of the day, everybody still agreed on what Final Fantasy was. All because it had a clear, consistent gameplay identity, a clear vision on gameplay consistency, that one gameplay formula that the series can use from here on out, whether that's turn-based or a hybrid action style like the remake trilogy. But a lane needs to be stuck to and cultivated beyond perfection, something to where fans can look at a new game in the series and say, yeah, no other game other than Final Fantasy is doing this. This is something that they created. And the franchise hasn't had that moment for over 20 years. Well, none until the remake games came in and gave us a fresh new battle system that is completely unique to the series. Something that they should absolutely keep close to their chest and maintain for the future. We've had great games since then, but none that stand out as something unique solely to Final Fantasy. This franchise was the one to set the trends, not chase them. And if they can learn to use what they already have, I mean, hell, they can hypothetically even use 16's combat and tweak it to better fit in line with Final Fantasy standards. But to also just use the safest route would to be using the combat system the remake games have established, building on that for multiple games to keep that consistency and familiarity between new releases. Not only will this bring back good faith to the modern games, but it'll unify the fan base in a way that we haven't seen for quite a while as a result of unclear gameplay direction in the series. I want a story that captures the sense of fighting with characters who are very different from each other, who are from different corners of the world yet come together for a common goal. That newfound family that gets built up through the course of your journey to the point where you never want the game to end. Final Fantasy VII Remake has this, but it's also overshadowed by a tiring, convoluted multiversal plot that at this point feels extremely unnecessary. Final Fantasy 15 makes us connect so much with the camaraderie and the brotherhood, but is held back by a disjointed narrative and unfinished vision. And Final Fantasy 16 almost completely gets rid of the party to focus solely on the main protagonist, leaving very little screen time to characters that are actually very interesting and well written when they actually have the spotlight. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's Clive's story. I want Final Fantasy 17 to inherit all of the best qualities of the series and create a truly inspired Final Fantasy game that's theirs and theirs alone. Final Fantasy 9 had such a unique party with characters of all different races, from every corner of the world joining Zidane for a common cause. Granted, a lot of Final Fantasies have that feeling, but Final Fantasy just elevated that and felt like the true realization of that idea. Characters that are truly unique that we have to travel across the world to meet and have them join our party. Characters who aren't just the boring human race, but give us like Mikotes, throw in some hippo people in there, give us some Lalafels, and really just spice it up to really give the world that much more fantasy. I want to see a job system make a return as well. Take from Final Fantasy V, Final Fantasy X-2, and Final Fantasy XIV. So many great references to look to bring back such a beloved system that the series has not seen in a single player Final Fantasy for years on end. Give us a combat system that is inspired by one of their most well-received games in recent years, or build off any well-made foundation that fits Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy alone. The series needs to find gameplay that they can perfect to where people can confidently say that this is something only Final Fantasy is doing right now. They can return to turn-based or keep going in a hybrid action style approach, but they cannot afford to throw away amazing foundations set and keep creating combat systems from scratch. It is a waste of money, of resources that could be better spent improving on numerous combat systems they already have. Not to mention that time could be spent developing the rest of the game. Sticking to a lane, perfecting one combat system, creating a unique set of characters with a party system, all under one full Final Fantasy game, with no catches, no multiverse shenanigans, a fully realized vision under a team who can truly balance what traditional and new fans want. And maybe it's easier said than done, but I think it is something that absolutely has to be done in order to maintain a positive outlook for the future of the series.